if they completely left, that would have huge implications across our business, no question. But I think it was maybe more is this a snowball that's starting at the top of the hill? And we've never lost a customer really up until that point. We had a couple of customers churn the year prior, but they were some of the smaller customers that, it really didn't make a huge dent. But this was one of the big customers that churned. First time that has happened in 10 years. Is this the beginning of a snowball that's going to continue?
Welcome to Through the Dip, the show about what it's really like to be an entrepreneur and the life lessons learned while navigating your company through the dip. My name is Steven Souter, and this episode is brought to you by Hustlefish. If your brand is juggling direct-to-consumer and business-to-business messaging, things can get complex. It can make your brand voice feel like it's got multiple personalities. Hustlefish can help you untangle that. Head to throughthedip.com/marketing and book a free strategy call. Now, on today's episode, I head down to Indianapolis to meet up with Doug Booth at a local municipal airport. Doug loves flying and uses flying analogies all throughout his business. He co-founded Multiply, an IT asset company that started in a storage unit and got robbed before it even had its first office. He lost thousands in equipment and gained a belief in what he likes to call cheerful expectant. Now, it might sound like cheerful expectant is pretty close to optimism, but what I learned from Doug is that optimism often assumes a positive outcome. It looks forward and sees a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a belief that things will probably work out. But cheerful expectancy doesn't make that bet. It's not predicated on the outcome at all. It's rooted in a choice to move forward anyways, with joy, with faith, even with a kind of playful absurdity, regardless of whether the tunnel has a light at the end or not. Doug's story isn't about some miracle save. It's about what happens when your biggest customer pulls the plug on a contract and you suddenly have to decide, do I crash this thing or do I fly through the crash? What he learned is that leadership doesn't mean having the answers. It means staying in the room. It means making the hard calls and showing up every day, even if you're waffling between fear and faith, praying for a parachute but deciding to keep flying anyways.
About a week or two before we started Multiply officially. So I had told the company exact target that I was leaving. Aaron and I had sort of created the LLC, and we're like, we're going. We were working out of a storage unit. That's where all the units, the computers were actually sitting, right? Because we didn't have an office or anything.
Yeah.
And we got robbed. And so like
All the laptops?
Yeah, someone was in the storage unit, happened to be in the area. They saw that we had computers in our storage unit. Like, pro tip, don't put a computer business in a storage unit. But we got robbed. And so then the question was, what are we going to do about it? And I think now reflecting on it, being cheerfully expectant is essentially the mindset that we had. The next day we brought a big ass U-Haul and we just loaded up whatever we had left and we got an office. And the funny thing is that office was near an airport. And I just find it so hilarious looking back now, but we couldn't afford the $700 rent for the whole closet room that we had. And so there was checkered, prints on the floor. So the building management was so gracious to us. They said, well, here, we'll just mark this checkered print. Everything on that half you're paying for, everything on this half you're not. Now, the funny thing is the door was on that half. So we had to walk through the part we couldn't pay for to get to the part we could. But being cheerfully expectant that, you know what, we did just get robbed, but we're still going to show up because what we're doing is building a business that is more than just computers. And what has unfolded in the last decade has been nothing short of tremendous. But having just that mindset of being cheerfully expectant.
But were you cheerful in that moment when you were robbed? Because I feel
Honestly,
like I would not be.
Honestly, the funny part is, and Aaron and I have reflected on this quite a number of times. The funny part is, I think genuinely I was equal parts naivety and cheerfulness, maybe mixed together. But I was. Aaron was devastated because, essentially he had just partnered up with me on a handshake and a hug. We then get robbed. And, he's looking at me from his perspective saying, oh no, this, kid basically is going to join me. And now we got robbed and we got nothing. But in my mind, it was like, there's going to be a story here. Like, we're just going to show up. Let's get some coffee and just haul all our stuff over to the actual office that we ended up in and see what comes of it.
Did you have insurance that would pay for it? Or
the insurance company thought the whole thing was kind of a fraud, which was hilarious and sad. And so, to this day, we never were made whole by those computers. The beautiful thing was everything had already been wiped. So there was no data breach. There was no concern of any of that. And ultimately the guy that did the robbing, he was caught, and he had stolen a car. He had like his life was in shambles.
Yeah.
And so we weren't made whole, and we didn't make a big deal about that because we were looking ahead, not behind.
And so you start off with Salesforce being your first client.
The Salesforce was our first
Which is
customer.
kind of, I feel like, the dream of an entrepreneur.
It-
Just trying to
yeah.
sell into Salesforce, I'm sure.
To be quite honest, I think we had the inverse of what I thought was the normal story, where you start with small companies and then get your way into a big company. We just had the opportunity to start with a big company. And actually, we're still working with those big companies. We have a few of those that we picked up over the years. But we're also trying to take what we've learned to the small companies, because that's a heart and passion that we have as well. But what was funny about the Salesforce, kind of contractual conversation, I was an employee. I then leave, turn around and say, well, hey, some of the work I was doing, that automation work, like there's some immense value to the Salesforce and ExactTarget business that we can bring. And so we turned around and said, we would like to be the ones to actually do that transition of about 2,000 computers from ExactTarget to Salesforce. We wrote an application to help us do that because there was only a couple of us, we didn't have an army of, resources to do this. We called that application SwapForce because everything at Salesforce is something force, and that took off. And what happened was we were given 6 months in that sort of contract to say, hey, in those 6 months, get what you can done, and then we're going to bring in the standard service providers that we have at Salesforce. And 6 months later, we were kind of given a re-up of our contract, and then here we are 10 years later, we're still working with Salesforce as one of our customers, and they've used a lot of the products that we've built over the years from that day.
Yeah. So then fast forward me from kind of this bootstrap start to like you keep growing it over 10 years, but then in 2023, what size are you? How large are you? What does the company look like before you start heading into the dip?
So 2020, we were in the $2 million range. $2 million.
You doubled to 4, or you doubled it to 2?
No, we doubled from 1 to 2.
Okay.
And then from 2021 to 2023, we went from 2 to 4.
Okay.
So we had some pretty exponential growth in those years.
With a team of only 8?
No, so the team of 8 also grew, and at our peak, we had about 25.
All right. Yeah.
And so over that time, Multiply's history had become essentially the, up and to the right, the hockey stick growth.
Yeah.
It's like, well, this is incredible. And I think, what had essentially taken place was we've grown our contracts within Salesforce. We had diversified the contracts that we had because we had some that were product-based. We had some that were services-based. We had some that were IT asset disposition, so buying those computers and reselling them. We also had grown our customer base outside of Salesforce, not necessarily to the degree that perhaps we needed, but we had some really awesome things happening. We kind of entered a market of what we called high growth tech, which were these type of startup companies, like think ExactTarget, 5 years prior to Salesforce. And we wanted to connect with those companies because that's what we had experience with. And we had a couple of those sign on. We also brought aboard a couple of other local enterprises here in Indianapolis, and all of that, was happening in a good way. And then in 2023, when we sort of got this nod of our annual agreement with Salesforce for one of the 3 contracts was going to go down to a 6-month agreement, that was one of those like, oh, okay, well, if that actually transpires to be a removal of a contract, we're talking, $750,000 that would be decrease in our revenue annually. And it wasn't necessarily a financially motivated, decision that we had to make. But when the dip happened, we then, became very clear that we needed to right size our team to the production that we actually needed.
Yeah.
And so when 2023 hit and we had sort of that ramp down period, it became one of those like, well, we aren't up and to the right anymore. And actually, you know what? The honest truth is, small business has these ups and downs. And maybe this is one of those that we just need to actually fully embrace.
When that contract got reduced from 1 year to 6 months, did you start making plans for what would happen if it got canceled? Or you were like, let's see what would happen?
Yeah. I mean, so number one, we definitely kept our eyes open and head on a swivel within Salesforce to try to understand what was going on. Because a lot of what was happening on our end was speculation. Obviously, when you have a partnership of 2 businesses, there are certain things that can be shared and certain things that can't. And at the time, there was no projection of we are globally consolidating this particular facet of what we do, or it was nothing like that. And so we were just trying to continue showing up, do good work within what we still had, but also really pushing to get back to an annual agreement. We also kind of did some risk analysis of, okay, if we did lose this contract, what steps do we need to take? What would we be doing? I think the hardest part for me was balancing this fear-based mindset of what if, and this hope-based mindset of, well, what if it actually pans out okay? And so kind of holding those both in tandem was a little bit of this tension. And then when it became very clear, kind of at that 6-month renewal that we have a 3-month ramp down, then we had another choice to make. Like the first feelings I had were things like worry, fear, concern, confusion, maybe anger, all of these different things coming. But then, after kind of wrestling with those, it became another one of those, like, we have to end well. We've been a partner with this organization for these 10 years. We're going to continue in these other 2 facets of these contracts that we have. There's no question we're going to end this well. And so we set up a project plan for the ramp down, and we did end incredibly well ahead of schedule. So we basically removed ourselves by ourselves ahead of schedule.
Take me back to when you got the news that you had a 3-month ramp down period. So you knew you were losing that contract.
Yeah.
You said you had all these emotions.
Sure.
One of them you said was anger. What were you angry at?
I think because we had given opportunity for them to share pretty openly and transparently, and that didn't happen. I will say in Multiply, I definitely understand this crux of being transparent and not being transparent and the choice in that. I would say, even through this kind of dip season, when we were up and to the right, every quarter we would share our financials with our team very openly. We also chose at the very beginning of Multiply to give 10% back to our multipliers, but also 10% goes to organizations doing good in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that was a small number, it was very easy. As that got bigger, it was also a little bit harder to do that, but we continued doing that.
Yeah.
And those were really awesome conversations to stand up in front of the team and say, hey, we just did really well. Here's another bonus. Well, the choice that I had was, as we were going on a downtrend and we didn't have bonuses, were we going to be that transparent? And the answer is yes. And I think there was a level of transparency that didn't come from our customers that I think would have been appreciated.
So were you able to hit profitability and payout bonuses every single quarter?
Up until 2023. Yep.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, it is and still is a wild ride.
And so 2023, you had to sit down and tell the team, hey, this isn't happening. Did you wait?
Yeah, actually 2024 is when that happened, because 2023 is when we had sort of the indicator that, this is going to a 6-month agreement. And then it was the spring of 2024 that we had, the ramp down period. And so our first negative quarter would have been Q2 of 2024. And we've had a couple of those in this last year.
How did the team take it from when you went from being where every quarter you're paying out these bonuses? I'm sure people are loving it, to all of a sudden having to say hey guys, sorry, we can't do this anymore.
I think they appreciated the openness and transparency that we gave. I think something I learned is honesty doesn't, scare people. It actually lets them in. And so just to be very open about, this is where we're at. I still believe that we can kind of bounce back from this. But at this time, we aren't going to be able to pay out a bonus. And I'd say they took it surprisingly well.
Did you tell people, when Salesforce reduced their contract from 1 year to 6 months, they're hey, kind of started raising red flags?
That one was immediate.
Okay.
I would say not the 6-month one, because actually during COVID, the 6-month, the going from annual to 6-month had happened during COVID.
Okay.
And so it just gave us an indication that something could be changing.
Yeah.
But when the 3-month ordeal went down, that's when I did tell the team. And how I did that was, basically we do a weekly flyby. We call it the MTX weekly flyby. So it's a communication to the team saying, here's our metrics, here's where we're at, here's some notables that are going on. And so instead of writing in text for that particular week, I added a video as well and just shared, this is what's happening. And I think setting up some guidelines, even for me to kind of work within during this, potential dip at that time, was super helpful. One was I committed to our team that we would over communicate, that when I know things and when I can share things, I will share them. Another one was being definitive but not abrupt in what we have to share, and what we need to share. And I think also finding creative solutions in what we're doing. That was the DNA and ethos of Multiply from the beginning, and it was just tapping back into that I do believe we can find creative solutions to get back out of this. And then ending it with just this call for unity and hope. And I wasn't trying to give people baloney, but like to genuinely land on the choice of not fueling fears that starve faith, but actually fueling faith that can starve fears.
Yeah.
And I did not do that perfectly, I'll be honest. I think I was waffling between the two for a lot of this season.
What were you feeling internally, like trying to navigate the company? Like, so you're trying to like hold the tension of like optimism, or but also like what's actually happening, the reality of the situation, and you're trying to be encouraging to the team. You're also trying to be transparent to the team. But like, what's going on inside? Like when you're at night laying in bed trying to go to
Yeah.
sleep.
I was all over the map, to be quite honest. I think the feelings of letting people down, the feelings of disappointing people, of we may not have Multiply anymore. Like not that this contract would crater us completely, but like your head gets ahead of yourself quite a bit. And so it's like, well, if one goes down, what if our other customers go down?
Yeah.
Right? Like what's going to happen?
When you were thinking about like the whole company going away, was it like if this one customer leaves, like that has huge implications?
I think, yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Salesforce, if they completely left, that would have huge implications across our business, no question. But I think it was maybe more is this a snowball that's starting at the top of the hill? And we've never lost a customer really up until that point. We had a couple of customers churn the year prior, but they were some of the smaller customers that, it really didn't make a huge dent. But this was one of the big customers that churned. First time that has happened in 10 years.
Yeah.
Is this the beginning of a snowball that's going to continue? But it just so happened that in early 2024, I had started this discipline of getting up early in the mornings and just having some quiet time to reflect, to hope, to pray, to just be and think about my thoughts. And I got into this discipline of writing down thoughts and wrestling with them. And that was well before any of this turned out. But then when all this came, it's like, oh my goodness. Well, that quiet time became even more powerful because there was an inner peace that came from it. Don't get me wrong. The fear was still there and I felt like I was waffling between both of them, but there was this very centered inner peace that did come from it that I think did help me kind of navigate some of those moments. And I think that discipline of continuing that through some of the dip, and actually even to this day, has been helpful. It's been centering for me. Also, the boundaries that my wife and I had set up kind of going into when we started a business 10 years ago. She was starting in residency and medical school and going through all of that. And just trying to understand, okay, what is our life going to look like when she's a doctor and I'm a business owner and we want to have kids?
Yeah.
And early on, we had those conversations and we started setting up routines and disciplines back then. And honestly, I think some of this, I look back and even see the legacy of my mom coming out through it. I think my mom was able to navigate a number of new beginnings in her life, but then also the disciplines of running every day, no matter what. And then running is a processing way for her. I've adopted that as well. Just having faith as a guiding principle. My mom introduced that to me. But then to actually set and hold to those disciplines and those boundaries was incredibly important through this season. Me running 3 times a week was a way for me to process, blow off some steam, work through what is going on. Those quiet times in the morning, writing my thoughts down, reviewing those thoughts, trying to understand what do we do? What is the next step? And I think that was all very helpful in this season.
Did you feel pressure to have to come up with an answer like ASAP, or
Absolutely.
did you feel like you had the space to think about it?
I mean, I think our team, after I sent that video in the flyby, I then also interacted with our team. That doesn't go away. And our team was looking a little bit to me and to our leadership to say, what do we do next? Are we going to make any decisions? What are we doing? And so I think there was this pressure to make a decision. Thankfully, Multiply had those years of success, and so we had a rainy day fund. It wasn't like we had to make a decision immediately because of some financial cratering that was going to happen or anything like that. So we were able to be intentional about the decisions that we did make, but I think there was definitely pressure to make decisions, and maybe even more pressure to make the right decisions. And maybe that even uncovered the fact or the fallacy that there is even a right decision, right or wrong.
Yeah.
But just maybe making the next decision.
I feel like as a leader, I've always struggled with being in a place like that where you have to make a decision. You want to make the right decision, but like time is happening. And as time goes on, like a decision has to be made. And so then you just pick something and you just go for it.
Go for it.
Or do you just wait till you like figure out the right decision, figure out how to buy more time?
Yeah. Analysis by paralysis, maybe? I mean, or do you just go for it? And I think, aviation is another, there's another aviation element we can bring to this, that if you're in a small plane and you're in a tailspin, that means you're just spinning, you have no control. The best way to get out of it is to go straight down. And guess what? When you go straight down, you are looking at the ground. Like, you hopefully have enough altitude to recover, but as you go straight down, the wings can regain lift and then you can pull out of that. But essentially, like, that's what you have to do. And you can't just wait until you run out of altitude and hit the ground and become a lawn dart. You have to make a call.
Yeah.
But also, if you're going to crash, pilots are taught in flight school that you fly through the crash. You don't give up flying right before the crash, or you fly all the way through the crash. Think of Sully Sullenberger landing on the Hudson. He went all the way to the end and then helped get everyone out of the plane too, right? But flying all the way through the crash is a very active role in it. Not becoming a victim, not becoming a hero either, but it's just being a participant all the way through it. And I think the presence and the peace that I was able to get from some of those quiet times was helpful for this. But also just that knowing that we do, like, it became clear that we needed to make a call, because at some point, it was mid last year, when the actual services, the production element of this contract was being impacted, we were overstaffed. Like, there was no question. And it was going to become, do we just leave the staff as is? Because financially we can for now. It can't be forever. We can't burn cash forever, but financially we could. Or do we make a call now so that it increases the longevity of, the build back period? And it did become clear that we needed to right size the team to the production that we actually had.
As a company that like focuses on like device security and provisioning and all of that stuff, like, as multiple companies, like large scale companies, have had layoffs, you hear about people waking up and their laptop is locked, and that's how they find out that, oh, I've been laid off, because like they're trying to keep their infrastructure safe. They're trying to make sure
It's
that
all fear-based.
Yeah.
All of it.
But how did you handle it then? Because like so the people came in the morning and you sat down, it sounds like individually with each person.
Individually,
What'd you say to them?
I mean, I don't remember the exact words, but I know our people leader was in those conversations with me. I was the one leading the conversation. Obviously, when I went down and basically said, hey, can we talk? We walk up to a room and Dallas is sitting there, and it's like, oh, we're having a talk, aren't we? So while I set those guiding principles of not being definitive but not abrupt, it came very clear to me that there's no way to not deliver this news abruptly, because the news of layoffs will be abrupt. So I just attacked it with directness, saying, because of what happened with this contract, and because of, kind of the future production needs of Multiply, we're right-sizing our team and your role is impacted. And we were, I believe, fairly generous in an offboarding package for each person that was impacted. All of these were involuntary, all right? But trying to take care of them and think about their families, and hope that, this can help with their transition. But just being direct, and our people leader, his name's Dallas, had given me a piece of feedback at the end of that day, that he just so appreciated the compassion that I showed to each individual team member as we were delivering this news. And he and I, honestly, that morning went back and forth on, is this the day that we do this? Because remember, I had kind of had this resolve that it is today. It needs to happen. I cannot look people in the eyes without it. And he had thought maybe we give it a day or two to just, make sure. But at the end of that day, I think he was grateful to have gotten to be a part of that discussion. He had appreciated the compassion and the directness that, I shared. And I believe our multipliers also appreciated that as well. And actually, I was kind of reflecting coming into this conversation of what were some of the initial actual like resolutions, the potentials, right? And the first one, my wife can attest to this, but one of the first ones was, you know what? I think I'm okay with multiply creators. And I sat with that for a while in those quiet times in the morning. I'm okay with multiply creators. But then I realized, why am I okay with multiply creators? It's because I don't want to make the hard decisions. It's because I don't want to be the one to be the bad guy to say,
Like
I'm
you
sorry.
you would just keep multiply going, keep employing people, burning
No.
through cash, or what do you mean by crater?
Yeah, the burning through cash, that snowball. Keep in mind, I was still thinking of, okay, obviously it was impactful losing a contract, but the snowball in my mind was all of our customers are going to just say we're gone, and now we have no company, right? Like that's metastasized to that, and so in my head, a thought that I had that crossed my mind, it was one of them that I wrote down, was I think I'm okay if multiply becomes a lawn dart and we just end it, because then, I didn't know this until after the fact, but it was because in that way I don't have to be the bad guy to make the hard calls.
Yeah.
Or in fact, maybe I'll just open it up to the team and say, hey, anyone scared? You want a parachute? Here.
Yeah.
Right? But then again, I'm not being intentional about the decisions because I'm scared of those decisions.
Yeah.
And then that's when I realized, maybe having some guidelines, some guiding principles to reflect on and come back to would be important. And then actually being intentional about these decisions is the approach that I want to go with, rather than just being a victim to, well, we're just going to, crater.
Yeah.
Amelia Earhart, another airline example. Amelia Earhart says, use your fear. It'll take you to where your courage is. And I think through this, I was able to build some courage to have conversations that aren't, where do we go from here? To actually make decisions, to lead, to be a leader, to be one who stands in front of the team, even when it's not roses and sunshine, and say, I still believe in who we are and what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And while the numbers may not look great, I'm still here, I'm still showing up, and I'm still fully committed to this. And even if that means we're going to go into a nosedive for a period to get out of this spin, I believe we can pull back out of it.
So where are you at right now with multiply? Like has things stabilized fairly well? What is it looking like as you're looking into the next year?
Yeah. So with 2025, we are looking at we need to bring it on a few more customers. Interestingly enough, with the Salesforce deal, there's been some change in the leadership, and actually a reversal a bit of the decision that was made to globalize, just because it is very challenging to do what we do in a global nature. So who knows if that means opportunity. Obviously we're still in the seat for a couple of these other contracts with Salesforce, so there may be more that comes from that. We're still eyes open, head on a swivel. But I think back to the relationships matter piece, we are actively seeking new customers, and what we found is relationships, and those who have worked with us may know people who also may need some of the things that we do, and that's what we're really shaking the bushes on to get more business, leading heavily into relational selling, making connections with people that either are in IT or may know someone in IT, and then just sharing some of the stories that we've gotten to experience and what it looks like to work with Multiply and to have multipliers as an extension of your team.
Yeah.
That's all still very much needed. We're in a place right now where, looking ahead at 2025, if we were to stay exactly where we are for the next 12 months, we would run out of cash. And so, for the last 10 years in my head, it's always been, well, we always kind of have a 90-day window of, if we lost all of our customers, we've built up a nest egg where we can have that runway.
Yeah.
And that's ebbed and flowed. But, to actually have sort of the fear or the sharing of that knowledge with our team, it does open the eyes a little bit more to say, well, we do need more stability in our business. We're looking for more stability so that any one customer doesn't cause the turbulence that this last year has caused, and any one customer churning, or one customer signing a new deal and then all of a sudden we have to bring on 10 more people. Either direction, we just are looking for stability and repeatability in our business.
Yeah.
And I think the hard part in that is holding, again, the hope and the faith that this is going to work out with the reality that, well, if we don't have new people sign up in 6 months, 12 months, who knows, there may be another round of these conversations. My hope is if that does happen, our team at least knows how we're going to approach those conversations. Again, with that same guiding principle of over-communicate, find creative solutions, being definitive and not abrupt, and trying to just share with compassion when those times come.
Yeah.
But also there's an entire reality that we go a different direction, and we're back up and to the right, where there's incredible success. We're able to stand up and say, hey, we just had a quarter of profitability and we're giving bonuses back out. Like, that's also a reality. While we can look dead in the eye the fear of this is what happens if we don't win, there is the reality of this is what happens if we do win. And now we kind of are more familiar with both.
Cool. That's awesome. I want to dive into this aviation stuff because you brought up planes and aviation. Like,
We're at an airport.
Yeah, a lot. Why airplanes? Why aviation? What's the story behind that?
I love airplanes. I always have. I think it goes back to my dad. He was in the Ford business, and he had a Ford dealership named Airport Ford. It may go back all the way to that, but when he was a Ford dealer, he also became a pilot and flew to a couple, local places to, do some of his business. He had someone walk in and want to buy Airport Ford because it was quite successful. And so he thought, shoot, go for it. That's awesome. I'm going to go retire early. And that's when he had me, essentially. And he learned that, he's a lot better at selling cars and running a Ford dealership than investing. So he needed to find another gig. And so that's when he bought a golf course, essentially, because he thought in his head, you work half days where you go in, you play around the golf, have some lunch, count the money. Like, that's what you do at a golf course. And half days turned into working half days. You start when the sun comes up and you might go home when the sun goes down. But I was steeped in that growing up. But it's so funny because the golf course that he bought in my hometown was adjacent to an airport. And again, he was still flying at that time. So there would be many times I recall we would hop on a golf cart, drive over to the airport, hop on an airplane and go fly around for a little bit. And it was just such a fun thing. And then when I was at Purdue, I roomed with a pilot. And so he was in the aviation program. And then I was awarded a scholarship through Purdue Bands that basically said, you can use this for whatever you'd like. And I had some other scholarships already. So I just said, is it possible that I could use this to get a pilot's license? Because aviation is a big deal at Purdue. There's an airport right on campus. Yeah. And they said, well, yeah, we could probably work that out. Again, the answer is no if you don't ask. So we worked out the details. And that next semester, I was up in the air every day and became a pilot and just loved everything that brought. I never saw the metaphors continuing beyond that. But then, when we moved to Indianapolis, aviation and being a private pilot as a hobby is very expensive. So I didn't fly much. But I joined a flight club for a stint and got to fly a little bit as we were getting Multiply going. And it just kind of became a theme. We're in a business, and the first year that aviation theme was the year of lift because that's what we're doing. We're getting up off the ground, and then we accelerate, we build altitude, and we've had them over the years. But then about 3 years ago, our team just really leaned heavily into it with me. And I was almost like, whoa, we don't have to do that. But our team just dove into it. And the product that we now have, we call Tailwind, which is an aviation theme. And last year for our company kickoff for the year, we had it at an airport, just because, again, leaning into the aviation theme. But there's so many business metaphors to aviation. Today, we talked about the dive. If you dive, or if you're in a spin, you have to get into a dive to get out of it. Flying in the fog, there's so many elements to aviation that I just can't help myself now.
That's awesome. I love it.
I feel like my team has unlocked it for me to now. We're just.
There's so many good analogies too. Just like a business, a life.
One question that you had kind of in the prep to this was reflecting back. What would you do differently and that sort of thing? And I think there's an obvious like pre-dip moment would be just have more business, right? Like build more business with resilience such that one customer doesn't, create turbulence. And I think we're really doubling down on that now. Should we have done that before? Maybe, but I also wouldn't have learned all the things we've learned through this period. Post-dip, I would say there's this element of leaning into that awkwardness. We have every year a Multiply reunion where our team and our family and kids all get together and just spend time together. That's been something we've done since the beginning. So this was year 10 of doing that. And we had some, maybe it was excuses, maybe it was reality, but we had some changes to the dates and the place and and I never communicated that to those that were impacted. And I would say if I had any regrets, it's that. And I didn't recognize that I had that regret until we had the reunion and realized, wait a minute, the point of this reunion is to reunite who is Multiply, right? That includes those that have been let go or have left and gone on other grand adventures themselves. And I think that was just a takeaway that hit me pretty squarely that day when we're having the reunion and, everyone's happy, but also there's just this missing piece that, And so in the future, I do hope, I don't know how it's going to transpire. And frankly, I don't know if Multiply is going to last another 90 days to 90 years. But in the next decade, I want to live with intentionality and pressing into that awkwardness because these relationships do matter. Even though it might be awkward to say, hey, I let you go, but would you like to come back to this reunion? That centers back to the purpose of why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And maybe the shakeup of we've changed the place, we changed the date, just never got around to communicating all of that to everybody. Maybe that was all just kind of baked in fear of what could happen if we welcome people back. And it doesn't mean people have to come, but just so to know that there's a chair here if you want to be here.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a takeaway that I had.
That was Doug Booth's story, and I've been sitting with it ever since we talked. He reminded me that real leadership isn't about preventing the crash. It's about staying in the pilot seat during it, flying all the way through the dip, looking your team in the eye when the money dries up, and having the compassion and care and the courage to decide. And most of all, Doug taught me this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't dreaming big. It's waking up early, writing down your fears, and showing up again anyways. It's choosing not to disappear when things get hard. It's being cheerfully expectant, not because the future is certain, but because you've decided to be present in it. Now, I'll drop a link to all the things we chatted about in our show in the show notes. We release new episodes every other week, so follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to this. And if you want to be a part of something even bigger, head to throughthedip.com and sign up. Every time someone subscribes, I get this little ping on my phone and it reminds me that this isn't just a podcast. It's a circle of people learning how to keep flying together. I'll catch you in 2 weeks.